What a pleasure it has been to look at the Psalms together. And today we continue our time with Psalm 11, a short psalm, but also a psalm which hopefully, if you've been tracing along with us from Psalm 1 until now, you've started to see a bit of a trajectory in how the Psalms work. Psalm 1 through to Psalm 11 does focus on this slow movement right at the beginning of each psalm of the psalmists increasingly having their assurance and refuge in the Lord their God, which then allows them to see their enemies more accurately. Earlier in the Psalms we had a fight almost in King David between himself seeing the wicked at work and him looking at the character of God and going, why, God, is your world like this? But as he takes more and more refuge in the Lord, he increasingly sees God's perspective at play, which means he's increasingly able to see his enemies at play, to see their arrows or bows ready to ensnare him, and he is ready for the fight, he is ready to stand firm, and he will not run away. Psalm 11 has this great focus right up the front, and we're going to hear it read out in a moment, but I'm going to ask two questions which really focus our mind on the trajectory that this psalm will take us in, and then also help us go forward into Psalm 12 and following. The questions are, how does David see his enemies accurately? What enables him? And the second one begins by looking at how verse 1 flows into verse 2 seamlessly with this mocking call, as we'll hear it read out in a moment. And the mocking call from the enemies of David focus on their ability to persecute, harass, and use all their tactics, whether it's overt, out in the open, or in this case, mainly in Psalm 11, in the shadows. They get into areas where they can't be seen, where they can't be held accountable in this world, and they think they can harass and persecute you as a believer. And so the second question's focus is, what areas of your life do you feel you're being persecuted or harassed in order to give up on the faith? Psalm 11, for the director of music of David. In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to me, flee like a bird to your mountain? For look, the wicked bend their bows, they set their arrows against the strings, to shoot from the shadows at the upright in heart. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne. He observes everyone on earth. His eyes examine them. The Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates with a passion. On the wicked he will rain fiery coals and burning sulphur. A scorching wind will be their lot. For the Lord is righteous. He loves justice. The upright will see his face. As you just heard Psalm 11 read there, it does continue that twin theme of God blessing the righteous, keeping the righteous in his safe harbour and refuge, and also judging those who stand outside of his love and obedience to his word and character. And it ends, of course, with those words at the conclusion of the psalm, which really are meant as an encouragement for those who stand in the refuge of the Lord, in the home and security that God provides, and yet want to see a world that everybody does that. But until that occurs, we must rely upon the good justice and character of God to eventually be shown even to those, sadly, who are unrighteous and will therefore not escape the wrath of God as they may think they are doing, but will eventually incur his wrath even into eternity. For verse 7, as it says, you can read it there, great verse, for the Lord is righteous, he will not forget. We take refuge in him. Those who sling arrows, those who persecute, harass and condescend to you about your faith, sadly, because they themselves stand outside of the love of God. Verse 6 will be their lot. On the wicked he will rain fiery coals and burning sulphur. A scorching wind will be their lot. Now, like a previous psalm, of course, that can sometimes happen even in this world, but always it will happen in the next, because the Lord is righteous. He is justice. The upright person, as you may remember all the way back in Psalm 1, is the person who loves the Lord, takes their refuge in the Lord, who obeys the word of the Lord, and therefore is blessed by the Lord. And so, verse 1, in the Lord I take refuge. When your refuge is in the Lord, you can therefore see your enemies accurately. They are not people to be followed or envied. They are people to pray for they stand under the judgment and correct justice of God. And so David sees them and knows that they are not people to follow. For the burning coals, as that metaphor of judgment, will come onto them in this world and into the next. Because the Lord, verse 5, examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates with a passion. God cannot have his ways in eternity rubbished like the people today are rubbishing them. There will come a reckoning, and for those of us who trust in the Lord, we cannot be swept aside by artificial ways of dragging us away from the Lord. An artificial way is anything that looks like it has the promise of a better life, but in fact it is merely a sign of wickedness and selfishness. What is that? Anything that takes you out of the refuge of the Lord. Anything that drives you away from God. Flee from those things. Do not flee to the mountains for safety, or flee to your own home for safety, or flee away from your Christian friends for safety. Flee to the Lord for safety. He is the only refuge, and the upright will be in his presence forever. Pause at this point as you will hopefully see a couple of questions come up that you can start to pray about and start to look more closely at. What does it mean for me to be upright, according to verse 7? Amen.